And we're here for a very special Tita Laughs episode airing today on October 31st, which is the last day of
Filipino-American History Month.
Yeah, we just barely squeezed it in, rightfully so. And that is why we asked my very good friend, Ariana Rodriguez. And I know you through St. Monica, where we both sing in the choir. Yeah. And like many Filipinos, she has a fabulous singing voice.
I didn't get that gene. But both of you did. You guys can do a little ending song.
We can't. We'll do like some.
Our God is an awesome God.
Representing with the altos. Yeah. I have to like little anecdote. I have to like sit next to Ariana because I never like go to rehearsals or I'm like always coming in last minute. And she has such great pitch that I'm like, okay, if I hear her, I'll be fine. I'll be on.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
We work together really well. Our voices blend. It's the Filipino gene.
Yeah, exactly.
The Filipino connection.
So going back to Ariana and why she's here, I learned sitting in choir that she is heavily involved in Gabriela LA. Mm-hmm. So can you share with us and everyone who's listening what exactly that is?
I'd love to share. Gabriela Los Angeles is a chapter here in LA that fights for women and children's rights. It's a Filipino organization started in the Philippines. We're part of Gabriela USA. So there's many chapters in cities in the US like Chicago and New York, Bay Area. There's one in South Bay as well in terms of SoCal. And we're always expanding. And so we're a fighting organization fighting for national democracy in the Philippines. And really connecting the experiences of Filipinos here to the experiences lived by Filipinos in the Philippines, and always connecting those issues. And so I'm really happy today to talk about the stuff that we're doing, as well as how I came to understand my Filipino-American identity as a political identity, as well as personal one, a social one as well.
Absolutely. What I love hearing about just this blurb about a brief history of Gabriela and your involvement in it and how you're active in it. I know Stacey and I have talked about, we've taken ethnic studies, learn about like the plight of getting those classes just within the system. And I can speak for myself. I know I was heavily involved in and like just going to marches and all that and stuff when I was younger, and I love hearing people like you who are still doing it and taking action. And I think that's why it's so important that you're here today to inform so that we can be aware, but also what can we do too? And like, why is this important? How does this pertain to us as Filipino Americans here in the US, even though we're not there in the Philippines anymore? So,
but that's what I love about it is that you said that it's kind of connecting or bridging that Filipino and Filipino-American connection, because we always talk about how it feels like Filipinos and Filipino-Americans have such different identities. So the fact that this is kind of bridging that, I love that. Mm-hmm. And I know we've taken like ethnic studies courses, but a lot of it, like where I learned a lot about Filipino-American history was like in a broader like Asian American studies class. It was never just like specifically Filipino-American, whereas like Asian American, there's so many different identities within that, but nothing specifically dedicated to Filipino-American. So I'm so excited to learn.
Gabriela, it's like there's so many issues that you tackle just within the Filipino-American experience. It's so much. So before we even dive into that, can you give background of your upbringing and how that perhaps led you to become involved with Gabriela?
I'd love to. I grew up in a very conservative household. My dad was at the time a Navy pilot, for a helicopter pilot. And so he'd spent 6 months, 9 months flying in different places of the world, probably in the 2000s to 2010s. In the late 90s is when he graduated in the Naval Academy, actually in the early 1990s. My mom was music director at my church at our family church growing up, and my music teacher, which was very special. And she was born in the United States. My dad was not born in the United States. He was born in Cavite, which is just outside Manila, the capital of the Philippines. But he came as a kid. Their story of immigration was that my grandfather, his dad, tried for many years, did other jobs, but eventually joined the U.S. Navy as a cook. He cooked for the different Navy boats, and did other work in that field, I guess, serving other folks.
So your grandfather was in the Navy, and that's how the immigration story, because your dad was young and they all migrated here to the U.S. And that was in the probably 60s or 70s.
Probably. Yeah, either just around 1970, because my dad was born in the late 60s, and he was probably between 2 or 3 when he came over. And so they immigrated to the United States so that my grandfather could go and work, be based out of the United States, and go to different ships and different trip, whatever they're called. So he could go different places. So my dad grew up in many different states. He was in Nevada for a couple of years. He went to high school in Alaska for a little bit. Wow. They were in the Bay Area and traveled all over because that was the needs for my grandfather to fulfill his duty in the Navy. My grandma stayed at home and took care of the kids and raised them. My dad's only sibling, who's younger, was born in the United States. So he's the only kid of his family who was born in the Philippines. And so when all his life, he grew up on naval bases, knowing Navy kids, knowing a lot of different environments. Nevada is very different from Alaska, different from Oakland. And so he grew up and he always wanted to be in the Navy like his dad. And it was also the only life he ever knew, was being in the Navy. And so he eventually joined the Naval Academy, graduated as an officer, and became a helicopter pilot, which is a different and a higher rank than my grandfather, was allowed to be.
So that probably shaped the conservative view not everybody in, military, but a lot, in the military, especially from the Philippines.
100%. There is this sense of being very indebted to the United States. My dad would say, the U.S. saved our family because they allowed us to come from a really terrible, poor, situation. My grandma would explain sleeping in one room with all of her sisters in one bed, so close to the floor. It was constantly dirty. They had to just find things around to sell to people who were coming through to the area. And they described a really, really poor community. And so my dad understood it the U.S. saved our family. And so when they came to the United States, it was, I want to be as American as possible. He didn't teach us Tagalog, which is what he knows. Even now at the home, my grandparents will talk to him in Tagalog. They'll talk to him, have conversation, and he only responds in English. I've never heard my dad speak Tagalog. And he told us, he wanted us to be American kids. So he taught us English as our first language and our only language. And so now some of my adult siblings are trying to learn Tagalog as adults, and it feels, to connect to that part. It's so hard to learn that and to know that we could have asked our grandparents when we were younger. We could have asked our dad, but he instilled this we love America. It saved us. And so we're going to be as American as possible, to blend in, to assimilate. So he took on that identity and passed that down to us. And so it was a very conservative growing up because of how he understood the relationship between the U.S. and his own identity. It's so ingrained. It's a core part of him, this loving of the United States because of what it's done for us in his mind.
That's such a common paradigm for many Filipino Americans.
100%.
And was your mom similar, that experience? Because
not really.
Born here. I know. That's why I was like, how did they get together? They seem opposites.
I can. Yeah, my mom's family is very creative.
That's what I'm saying. I was like,
yeah.
You seem more like your mom.
Yeah, my mom, she's a music teacher.
Yeah,
she got her degree in music education to be a music teacher. Her siblings all are amazing singers and performers. They've done a lot of performing on TV, on tours. They had a music group growing up, which is very fun. Lots of stories around that. Yeah, the short of it's called Shekinah Glory. It was it was a Catholic young adult.
Spotify this.
They're not anywhere. They're only on cassette tapes.
Oh,
That's how.
Oh, how sweet.
But they were a Catholic pop group of young adults who toured at different like Catholic universities back in the day, which is very fun. But they look back and like, oh God, like they see the pumped up hair and the shoulder pads and their blazers and like, oh, that was so trendy back then. It looks so embarrassing.
That
now.
is so Filipino-American history. That's not in the book.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
isn't.
Our stand in the music, like
That's
even
true.
though it's not anywhere or published anywhere, there are some, because we're so musical, you know. But you hear some, that made a little bit of headway, but stories like this of like, oh no, they toured, they made a
East
push
Coast.
for it.
I love that. That's so amazing. And but like I've never heard of them, and it's
Which I think is fair because it was very Catholic. It was very
Very specific.
Very
Very
specific.
specific.
Not the pop charts. Like they went to like Steubenville, Ohio. Like
did
that's
they
where
create their own music, or was it more like singing like Catholic?
I think it was singing like more of the pop songs of the era, Catholic or Christian
cool.
songs that were really big at the time. They may or may not have written their own stuff. I think you must at some point have your own music, but I think it was mostly covers, or they don't talk much about that time. It's always been like an idea of mine, like that should be a movie, like it's so
We
interesting.
said
to
that
me.
though about our families. Like they never talk about
Never.
And it's
what they've done. I
fascinating.
know what they've accomplished.
There's so many great stories from that era. But I think they're the other side of the common Filipino-American narrative of they're very creative. They love to, really put time into that expression. But it almost is an apolitical identity compared to my dad, where it's to have a love of you. That's inherently or more obviously like a political kind of viewpoint. So for my mom's side, and my mom, I don't think she had a very strong political lean growing up. As I was becoming an adult, I would learn more that she is more of a moderate through conversations about things going on in the world. But I had to uncover that and really ask directed questions. She never really imparted that. She wanted us to have good Catholic values, but it wasn't like vote a specific way. She really deferred to my dad to like be the leader of the political thought of the household. And I think they just voted identically. Like, my dad made the decisions and she was like, okay. And then continued that. I think, I don't know how they vote necessarily, but, and it only has gotten more extreme, unfortunately, as I grew older. I have a story of in high school, I was homeschooled for a little bit and I did Catholic school for a little, but the first time I was in public school was junior year, which is the story of Mean Girls, coming from homeschool to junior year in a public school. And at the first week, there's like tabling, for all the organizations. I was like, what is, like, there's so many people. I couldn't even understand it. And I went to the Gay Straight Alliance table, GSA, and I have a lot of siblings my same age. So they were also in high school with me. And I thought it'd be cool. I'm like, wow, there's like, I'm straight, but like that's cool. Like there's a group we advance like acceptance, I'm still kind of I was conservative still at that time. My parents had all voted Republican their whole life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, well, that's cool. There's like acceptance. And that's a genuinely good thing. The Bible talks about love and accepting of others. And I driving to school the next day, my brother's like, I saw Ariana at the GSA table and I got in trouble because I was like at the table.
Just for being
Just for
at
like
the
talking to
table.
someone at the table.
Your
And I'm like, I'm straight, I
brother.
swear.
Oh
Which is
my
great.
God.
But it was a very it was a strict household. It was also a very narrow household in kind of what you can think or believe. And I think a lot of that shaped seeing the difference between how my brother, who's the only boy at the time, my parents have two younger boys now, that were born, one in high school, one when I was in high school and one when I was in college. So we have a different growing up. But at the time he was only a boy and he was treated so much differently than I was. Like he was allowed to go to public school first for a whole year to see, did he get bullied? Did he make friends? And if he had a positive experience, then we came out of homeschool to join the public school. And I was like, that a whole year of my life, I could have had more friends, like learned who I was, be exposed to more things. But there's a gender difference that I noticed growing up.
We talked about this in like previous episodes,
Especially in like Filipino.
Yeah, and it to me that really shaped. I started caring a lot more about women's rights because I saw how I was treated, and that's what got me to to take up a more of a political identity or learn more about why is it that I'm treated differently than my brother, and in other families it's the same thing. Like, why is that so common?
Yeah.
And that's what propelled.
Oh my gosh, I could totally see the link now of your specific upbringing, that specific experience, how that led you to, like, when you learned about Gabriela and all the work that that organization has and continues to do. And especially, we haven't even talked about Gabriela Silong, who, who it is named after. Do one of you want to explain Gabriela? I will, because I love
you should.
Gabriela.
Yes,
Like,
please.
I think I probably wrote. Oh yeah, I wrote a monologue in one of
You
my
wanted to
acting
do
classes.
Oh my god.
Yeah, one woman show. One day.
You
I will
should.
pitch that to
know.
everybody out
I know.
there. If we ever get funding, a one-woman show on Gabriela or other Filipina heroines, especially. I'll try to do this very quickly. Gabriela was the partner of Diego Silang, who was killed during when they were fighting the Spanish. And when he died, because he was a leader, she took the reins. A female was their leader.
And so young. She was so young.
Young.
Right?
Yeah. I think so.
Like, and I love that, this is centuries ago, even during that time leading against the Spanish, you see a woman taking charge with weapons and leading armies
And
going
men
into battle,
listening to
men
her.
listening to her, that they would listen to a woman. But I remember in the monologue that I just created, it's fictitious, but I just have her talking to, she's captured, because we know that she eventually is captured also, and is put to death. And she's just talking to another soldier saying, I let everyone down, but then comes to realize, like, no, like, there's more to go. Continued the fight. That's what's important. And that's what we're doing to this day. That's why I'm getting so teary-eyed, because there's organizations named after her and the women that continue to take that spirit.
Continue her legacy.
Exactly. So, it's so wonderful to hear, like, the work that Gabriela does. So, again, we already touched upon this with the politics and Gabriela. Can we go more into depth of, like, why should Filipino Americans care about the Philippines? When a lot of people will ask that, right? Because
And what's
we're
happening
here.
in the Philippines.
Yeah.
The politics of the Philippines.
Yeah. I get that question all the time, from many different people. Older folks who are Filipino, who consciously don't follow the news anymore because they feel like their life and their home is here. And then younger people who are second, third plus generation, who feel like there's no real connection to the homeland. Like, wouldn't even use that term really, to describe their relationship to the Philippines. They don't even, a lot of times this comes up when people ask themselves, like, what does it mean to be Filipino American? And they come up with food or knowing Tagalog or a different language.
Yeah,
the culture.
yeah.
And one thing that has usually is pretty opening, it's radicalizing, or it helps people open their eyes, is we ask people a lot, how did your family come from the Philippines to the United States? And then they'll often tell us a story of, they wanted a better life, or they wanted, there were no jobs. There was maybe something sketchy happening back home, and they came and then they got a job as a nurse, or they joined the Navy, or they became an accountant, any sort of thing. And then our question really is like, well, what prompted them to move? What were they facing in the Philippines? And sometimes they realize they hadn't asked that question, or they don't know, or that part is something that their grandparents or family aren't willing or open to talk about. And we find that the situation back home, oftentimes they came because of the martial law era, that they faced a lot of repression. There's a lot of violence, killings, disappearances, torturing of, like, priests, of human rights defenders, journalists, people that were not even Filipino, and then activists, young adults, specifically the youth, like people in going to UP or any of the other universities or schools there, have a rich history of resisting, but also experiencing, like, a lot of violence. And so a lot of families come because they faced that violence directly, or they had someone in their family who faced that violence. And then sometimes you have people who were really rich and they were afraid that they would be the next target during the rising protests. And so they came over as well. So there's a lot of reasons, but when we really dig into it, it's not an apolitical reason that a lot of people came to the United States. It often was because of the very political situation going on in the Philippines. And so to be connected to a Filipino-American identity and to think of it as a political identity is to really be curious about how we came here and why our families came here.
It's that curiosity that I think inhibits this real understanding and connection between, like you talked about, the bridge. It's the curiosity, because I will speak for myself again. It always stopped at, oh, my parents just wanted a better life. And it wasn't until I was older of like, especially even just doing reports all throughout school, oh, there was a lot going on in the Philippines and the history of it. And I always wondered, do my parents even realize that? Because some, like you mentioned, some are fully aware of that and are purposefully leaving the Philippines because they know they are informed. But my fear is that even some of our parents and ancestors who have left the homeland, because of, like, even in the Marcos eras, like my parents came from the province, how much information was just not even available to them, you know? Were they or were they misinformed? You know, that's the scary part of, like, oh my gosh, how much control did the Marcos regime have, or even any political power, that people are just misinformed or don't know.
I'd love to ask how your families came to the United States, because I believe you're both not born in the Philippines. Is that right?
I'm not, no. So my dad came from the Philippines. So I believe he didn't want to come, actually. So my grandmother, her new husband, my grandfather was actually killed in the Philippines. And when my dad was 3, and then my grandmother ended up remarrying, and her husband wanted to come to America because I think he thought that, like, he'd have more opportunity here. But my grandmother comes from, like, a very wealthy family, so she, like, led this life of privilege. And then they came over here. She brought all of her 7 or 8 children over, and her life, like, totally changed. Like, I don't know if she had to work before, but she, like, got a job at Intel, worked until she retired. And then all of my dad's siblings, you know, my dad worked at the post office, like, he had that. But he didn't, I don't know if he had, like, that sense of, like, America, like, saved by family, but he still was so Americanized. And didn't teach me Tagalog either, because he didn't want me to have an accent, because I think he thought it hindered him, which I wouldn't have had an accent, but I think that's just, like, a fear that you have as an immigrant, that you don't want your children to go through, like, what you went through coming here. But he's very Americanized, like, has so many American flag t-shirts. Like, he knows so much about American history because it was taught in the Philippines, even though, you know, he went to a Filipino school, was raised in the Philippines till he was 20. He knows so much about American history, but knows nothing about Filipino-American history. Like, he had no idea who Larry Leon was. He didn't know about, like, the migrant farm workers, what Filipinos went through before him, so that he could have those rights that he has now. And I don't think it's really important to him, which is so important to me, because I feel like he has that connection. Like, no one's going to question my dad, like, oh, you're Filipino? Oh, actually, they do. We were at Costco the other day, and 2 Filipino workers, while my dad was getting a sample, and he thanks them in Tagalog, and they're like, oh, you're Filipino? We thought you were Mexican. My dad is, like, the ethnically ambiguous man. When we went to Japan, they thought he was Japanese. When we went to China, they thought he was Chinese. When we went to the Philippines, they thought he was mestizo. So, but
Wow.
it was just, he loved America. Just, I don't think he had that sense of, like, it saved him, but he was still, like, a good immigrant. Like, he never spoke in Tagalog at the US. And my mom's family, who is white, always kind of uses him as this, like, example of this perfect like immigrant. Like he came over here. He doesn't like speak Tagalog in the workplace. Like you shouldn't do that. Like they're very much like, oh, my brother-in-law, if he did it and came here legally, even though he had all the resources, like he didn't have to, join the Navy or anything. His mom brought him over here and he didn't even want to come. But they definitely use him as like that example of like, this is a good immigrant. Like, this is what you should do. You shouldn't come here illegally. Without taking into context, like, he didn't have to fight to come over
He
here.
had a lot of
He
privilege.
wasn't escaping anything.
Yeah.
He had so much privilege, which I have to tell him, Dad, you didn't have to worry about like someone paying, like making your way here. Like you weren't fleeing like torture or political anything. Like it's so different. Like your experience was very, very privileged. But that might be also why he loves America.
Yeah, I could see why.
Yeah.
I would think I was sharing both with you. I was at a anti-racist training yesterday for art equity for my work, and we talked something about this. It was great to like just name what this is and what shapes people's paradigms, and it's the 8 social constructs of, once you are able to identify, each of us has a unique analysis. And so in this case with your dad with privilege, there are, out of all the 8, there are some, he's not a white male, like of course that there are things that, people who have, Christian, white male, heterosexual, etc., or high socioeconomic status, but your dad still fits a lot of those things and he has that privilege. And it's unfortunate when people aren't aware of that and see, oh wow, I can be a conduit for change and be an ally for other people. But now that's coming into consciousness for our generation. So that's why our generation, you see this movement, because we are aware, we're getting the education that our parents have fought tooth and nail for to give us a better life, even though they may or may not understand it. This is what the deal comes with, like, we're educated and we know what's up, and this is why we live the life that we want. So with my experience with my dad and my mom, it's a very common story of immigration here. My dad was in the Navy in the 70s and my mom was a nurse. They eloped and got married in the Philippines. My mom's side of the family did not know, but they married just so they can get the benefits and all that stuff, and it'd be easier for her to move to the U.S. because my dad moved to the U.S. first because he already got his citizenship through the Navy. So asking deeper again, why did you choose that path? Because essentially you wanted to move away from the Philippines, even though that's their home. And I don't think they ever went beyond, again, we want a better life. We just see our conditions here and we just want a better life and more opportunity. But I don't think they ever asked politically. I never dig deeper because I am scared to get the answer of, I believe that both of them were Marcos supporters. And I can't go deeper within that because I can't change people's minds. And I don't know their experience either. They don't have the same information that I do. And I know there would be a lot of conflict within that. So I don't even think because I have a very good relationship with my parents now and try to go as far as I can to get the answers of digging deeper, but it will stop at that because I think communicatively, I'm finding that they don't know how to dig deeper, and I can't blame them because they don't have the emotional capacity to dig in deeper, because there might be mechanisms and barriers that are in place that are protecting them from things that they've seen and the poverty they experienced and just the need and desire to escape it. So it's this balance of like, okay, I want to get the answers and dig deeper. I highly disagree with your politics and the whys, but I have to just listen and understand and still respect it, because I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here in in the US with my experience without the sacrifices that they've made to get here.
Fascinating. And is this reminds me of like a Navy admiral jacket or some sort of recruit.
So I was able to get that story at least from my dad. This is actually my dad's jacket in the Navy, and I asked him like, "What does this mean?" He's like, "Oh, I was first class in the electrician department."
Oh,
wow.
So it was an accomplishment. I was like, "Oh, Dad, that's so great!" Like, mind you, my dad is tiny. He's my size. He's like
He's so
5'3". It was already such a win for him to make the cut in the Navy, and that
It's competitive.
story is funny as of like how he got in. I'll say that for another time, but like that's why I love wearing this jacket. I mean, I'm a pacifist. War is it's a very complex issue, you know. I get it, but I wear it because it reminds me of the sacrifice and the opportunity that my dad took, his journey. And it was a difficult journey, you know, to leave his family and, you know, make friends and didn't know anybody. His brother didn't make the cut, so he couldn't even go with his brother.
Oh, wow.
So, and being tiny, like 5'3", and he was puny. He probably weighed less than I do, you know. So
I also think about though, like, with my dad, he came with his siblings and his family, but like with your parents, or possibly like your parents, like they were going to another country knowing like, I don't know when I'll see my family. I can't even imagine that, because I know like how close I am to my parents, and like I don't even know if I could do that. And just to have that to be that brave, or to be that like to take that initiative when you don't know when you'll see your family who you obviously love so much, to just give yourself and your future children like a better life. Like I don't even know what that is like, but it's so like fascinating and inspiring, really.
exactly. That's why I'm so glad you said that, because even though the politics is important, it's an important conversation that we talk about. There's the other side too of, even though our parents may or may not they may disagree and may not be privy to what we're talking about, there is something to be said and be grateful for what they did. And so I want to honor that and respect that while we still, you know,
Yeah.
go into
Multifaceted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue. It's not black and white.
No, because my dad did come with his siblings, but since he was raised in the Philippines, like by his aunt and grandma and his cousins, like that was his family. Like he is so close to his cousins over there. When we went to the Philippines for the first time, my husband was like, I've never seen your dad like that. Like even like with his siblings here, he's not like that. He was just alive. Like, and he hadn't been back to the Philippines since before I was born. And we went when I was 30. So he hadn't been back in probably like 40 years.
Oh my gosh.
And when he went there, it was like he'd never been gone. Like when he was with his family and just like even in the markets, like my husband was like, I've never seen your dad like that. And he loved it. Like we all loved it. He was just a different person. He was home, which is weird.
One thing I'll say, I totally love what you all are talking about. There's so many things that this brings up. It's like my views about the military, which are negative, you know, and just how there's such a, you know, they push this very specific view of like maleness and how to be a man. And I also think of my dad in many ways. Sorry, Dad. I think of my dad in many ways as a victim of this larger thing than any one person could, you know, topple, you know, which is the system that really, we know how the military preys on like young brown people in the United States as a final. So we don't even have to get into all that. But one thing I think that I would love to just like, before we wrap it, is really, the thing of family separation is really close to Gabriela. A lot of what the work historically we've done is like help reunite families. Our analysis of the Philippines is that there are like three basic problems with it. The biggest one being U.S. imperialism. There's such the U.S. has officially claimed the Philippines as, they bought the Philippines for $20 million in 1898 in the Spanish-American War, the Treaty of Paris, and Japan took over, and then the U.S. took over again, and the U.S. or the Philippines was officially like free in 1946.
Yeah.
And is it really free? You know,
I know, is it really free?
Is it really free? And we see so much dependence on our relationship with the United States that really we consider a lot of the presidents as just kind of like puppets controlled by the U.S. interests. You know, they want to spy on China or keep tabs in the Pacific because the U.S. gets a lot of money from its trade relationships in Asia, and also want to keep tabs on other rising powers in the world. So the Philippines is a strategic partner that they want to keep kind of subservient. The Philippines we consider, like many other places that are like imperial of, are colonized by the United States, or we have to export all our raw goods like rice and all the like fish and anything we grow in the Philippines. And we export it because we don't have any way like factories. There's not like huge factories the way we see American Amazon warehouses, everywhere in Arizona where my parents live now. They export raw materials and they have to import finished goods like cars. The jeepneys were like the export of too many Jeeps, so they brought them, export them to to the Philippines. And now we see jeepneys as a kind of symbol of like it's a U.S. car, a Jeep. That's not an Asian car. That's not, those things break. But it's export oriented and import dependent, and it makes it so it has to cater to U.S. interests. So we see this relationship that's way more than we can go into in one episode, but we see this like they need to keep the U.S. happy with how they run the country, and that's what leads, I think, a lot of this is, in addition to exporting things, it also exports people. They make a lot of money when people, and that's what they make a lot of money when people leave, and then they send remittances back because they tax that. OFWs, overseas Filipino workers. The number one place for them to go out of the Philippines is United Arab Emirates, but the second numerous place is the United States, and the largest within that is in Southern California. I think LA or Southern California might be the most populous place for Filipinos outside of Manila, like in one area, is our hometown where we're based up and where our families live.
Because Filipinos make up the top minority right here in California. We are top.
In the Asian
American. Yeah, we are the top.
Yeah, we're huge. And people don't know there's 100 million Filipinos in the Philippines. And they're like, there's so many disparate islands. Like, how would that be? There's so many people that left, and are Filipino, even nationals voting, but live in other places. So we see this because the government profits off of people going abroad and sending money back. The schools, they set up a bunch of nursing hospitals. In the United States, set up nursing hospitals or nursing schools in the Philippines. And they trained people because they wanted a place to get nurses that were trained in Western ways, or less expensive, to train. And so there's this whole system set up where what's causing families to have to leave, what we hear is so common is people left to get a better life, and they had to leave so many people behind. And we see this as not something we want for the Philippines. What if people had a choice whether to get a good paying job that could provide for their family in the Philippines, or leave on their own accord because they want to, but not because they're forced to. And that's the thing that's the politic part of it. So the one thing that we see, and we call it's a family separation. It's like forced migration. And that's what that's our vision, is one of the Philippines that does not include like forced migration. The other one is bureaucrat capitalism. So kind of running the country's government like a business. How can we profit? So we see a lot of people who own big land, like big landlords who own a lot of land, have a lot of people working for them. They're the ones who often win elections, have the money to win elections, and then they pass policy that benefits them and those in their like class, their economic status. In short, that's what that is. And the other one being feudalism. So many people working, 70% of people in the Philippines live in the countryside. The urban centers are actually not as populous as Manila, as like all the places that they farm for a living, till the land, grow vegetables, grow anything. And those people who live in the countryside have over generations will live and do that work because you can't ever find a way to buy that land that your family has farmed for generations. And so ending this subservient feudal relationship also would free a lot of these people to make informed decisions and not make informed to be able to choose the life that they really want and not feel trapped by the system that they could never individually overturn.
Wow.
So we really want to see an end to family separation, the end to the overturning of these three basic problems, to really have a free Philippines that has, factories, so that we can make our own stuff and not have to import it or be reliant on the U.S. trying to cut us a deal, which ends up hurting us in the end. We want to be in charge of our own political foreign policy, and not have to, again, be so subservient to the U.S. We want to see freedom for women, freedom for gender minorities or gender non-conforming folks. We want to see a pro-science culture, we want to see it to, there's a lot of idealistic or not material. I don't know how to describe it. I'm still Catholic, but I am like a socialist. So, there's
we can be both.
we can be both.
I know a lot of
It's
stuff.
it's
Well,
very
Jesus-y, though.
It is.
It's very
Yeah.
Jesus.
The culture
People
is
forget
almost
that. People forget that Jesus
yeah.
is the radical. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
yeah.
And the culture can be very superstitious in a way. And
We've
Absolutely
talked about that
superstitious.
juxtaposition of being so
Yeah.
Catholic or so Muslim, depending on where you are in the Philippines,
Exactly.
and still being very superstitious.
Yeah. And the issue of Muslims and indigenous people in the South, like Mindanao and other places, is a very political one. There's tons, that sacred land or indigenous place where they live has a lot of oil. And if foreign interests are allowed to mine without regard, then they're displacing indigenous Muslim people from the place where they've lived for generations. Before the Philippines was one united island. These people have lived on this land. And so freedom for indigenous peoples to have self-determination over what happens to the land and not have to cave to international foreign interests who wants the oil, or all of these things. When we really think about it, one saying that I remember really becoming aware of in college is that everything is political. How we live our lives, how we understand ourselves, how we practice religion, even it's conscious. And I think about it when we're sitting together at choir at church,
Our conversations being mic'd.
like it's like all these things are choices, and they all have context around them. So this is all to say, when I think about the Philippines, I wish that my family didn't have to be displaced because there's no living, because they were so poor, because there's no jobs in the Philippines. And we know, digging deeper is like identifying the reasons for that. And I really want to be part of a movement and part of a community that aims to solve the deep root of it, not just the like band-aid solutions. Like some of these things are really important too. As in the meantime, as we fight for like a real radical, like from the heart of it, like change, so that families can still be together, which is what I'm hearing so much in your stories. Is we were forced to be apart and live like thousands of miles, not of our own accord, brought for many different reasons. And so that's the vision that myself and that I have for the Philippines, and why I joined Gabriela, and why I want to be part of a community of people who share that vision. I know I can't do it alone.
I want to name some things that you mentioned, and it's beautiful. It's identifying, naming what the issues, what the problems are, because essentially we want to equalize power. We want agency. We want there to be peace. But in order to do that, we have to name what the real deep issues are. Then we can heal. Then we can heal, and then we can find solutions and deploy. Because even within all of that deploy, it's not going to be perfect. And like you said, it takes a collective to be accountable to each other. And when there is accordance for that, we see change. And I see that as a trend for many different movements, because we're not alone. I know it's a universal thing across the country with other groups, with other people of color. And
Totally.
that's why I love, again, hearing these stories and the specificity within our.
Absolutely. No, I just want to thank you, because especially putting like actual terms to it, like these are the three things that are really affecting the Philippines, and this is how like we can make it better. Like, I always know that like things, aren't great, but to have like specific concrete ideas or issues that you guys are actually working on is so beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.